Stacey Cole and Carol Hughes today taking over for Murder in the Morning. Tony is on vacation, and boy, I'm a huge fan of the medical profession. I have the utmost faith in them, but boy, we seem to highlight some medical professionals sometimes that maybe their ethics are just out the window.
No ethics.
None. We had a case about Lucy Letby, who was a nurse in the UK, who's accused of killing multiple NICU babies. And this case sounds a little bit, I wouldn't say totally familiar, but evil nonetheless. And this one is in the United States, in Highland, Utah.
Another story out of Utah.
Yes.
Golly.
Yes. This one is a local to those of us who are in the United States. This nurse, she told a patient that she had terminal cancer, that the patient had terminal cancer, but she didn't. Then she injected her with insulin and sat by while she died. And there was a motive for this. We'll get to that in a second. The story is out of Highland, Utah. It's just a shocking story that doesn't need a whole lot of dramatic buildup. On August 12th, 2024, a 911 call came in from a man named Mark Farnsworth. He told dispatchers his niece was unconscious, gasping for air like she was drowning, and that she had major health issues. Her name was Kacee Lyn Terry. She was 38 years old. When police arrived at her home, they found Kacee unresponsive in a bedroom. She wasn't alone. Sitting right next to her was 47-year-old Meggan Randall Sundwall, a registered nurse who claimed that Kacee had been in that state for a couple of hours. She told officers that Kacee had terminal cancer and had signed a DNR, which is a do-not-resuscitate order. She said that Kacee didn't want to go to the hospital. Sounds like it's a complicated end-of-life scenario. However, everything the nurse said was a lie. Kacee never had cancer. There was no DNR, no power of attorney, no medical records backing up any of it. Even her own primary care doctor confirmed it. So let's go back in time and talk about this a little bit. Kacee was transported to Mountain Point Hospital. Paramedics noticed something wasn't adding up. First, they found a diabetic needle near her, but she wasn't diabetic. Now, when they checked her blood sugar level, it came back as 14. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about blood sugar, anything under 40 is life-threatening. Anything under 60 is dangerous.
Wow.
I check my blood sugar on a regular basis. My dad died when he was 54 of diabetes. I've got a brother who is severely diabetic. When I checked mine the other day, it was 79, and I went, I need to go eat something. That's starting to dip into the lower part. You want to be under 90-ish. Diabetics are typically anywhere from over 120 to, God help us, 400. So imagine 14.
Yikes.
14. I mean, to me, this was intentional. I mean, it's one thing
Well, she injected her.
Yeah.
And she didn't need it.
Yep, she didn't need it. And that's the thing. You know, people make mistakes with insulin. You try to quickly reverse it, but she's a nurse. That was something she should have checked, you know, especially if you have an unresponsive person. That's one thing you check is, what's their blood sugar? Are we dealing with a life-threatening situation here that maybe they're in a coma, a diabetic coma for some reason? Even an undiagnosed person, you may not know what's going on. They may have low blood sugar. That can cause death. So doctors worked to stabilize her in the ICU, but the damage had already been done. And 3 days later, on August 15th, she was declared brain dead and died. So when doctors asked the family about her medical history, Kacee's sister told them she had terminal cancer and had been dealing with it for 4 or 5 years. That's what she had been told. Well, now came the hard truth from Kacee's actual doctor. There was never a cancer diagnosis. When the autopsy results came back, it confirmed that there was no cancer, no major health problems, nothing. The narrative came from Meggan Sundwall, the nurse. So police started digging, and they found a disturbing thread of over 28,000 text messages between Meggan and Kacee, going back to 2019. In those texts, the nurse, Sundwall, repeatedly talked about suicide, telling Kacee that if she were to choose, she would kill herself. She even allegedly offered to help Kacee die, framing it as a kind of mercy killing, while casually mentioning how her death could solve all of her money issues. So investigators discovered that shortly after Kacee's death, Sundwall deleted over 900 messages from her phone. Again, I'd like to point out, just because you delete them doesn't mean they don't still exist. They began to search Kacee's life insurance policy. According to the report, Sundwall believed, there it is, that she was the beneficiary of a $1.5 million policy on Kacee.
Oh my God.
Right? According to Kacee's family, they had suspected for years that Sundwall had been plotting something. And the evidence found in those text messages seems to suggest that it wasn't some spontaneous act. It was calculated, groomed, and dragged out over years under the guise of friendship or caretaking.
Man, she played the long game.
She did. And she administered a fatal dose of insulin, unprescribed, unauthorized, and ultimately lethal, and then sat there while her so-called friend slipped into a coma. She is now having been arrested on charges of first-degree aggravated murder and third-degree obstruction of justice, being held in a Utah County jail without bail. That's a nurse. She took an oath.
But I have questions about this. Kacee and Meggan had been talking for a long time, and Kacee thought she had cancer, but her primary care physician's like, no, she didn't. Was there never any conversations between the primary care physician and Kacee where the doctor explained to her you don't, or did Kacee ever try to get treatment for her cancer? I mean, how could you just believe one woman's version? You have terminal cancer, but you don't try to get any help with that?
Yeah, something isn't adding up there. But again, are we dealing with somebody who is so cold-hearted and...
Yeah, I'd kind of like to look over those text messages because obviously she got Kacee to believe this, but how do you get her? And she had a primary care physician. That's what's interesting to me. And the family suspected something.
What do you think the nurse was the liaison between the primary care physician that maybe she would go in
the clinic? And how did she think? And how did she think that she had this life insurance policy? And it just says that she believed she was a beneficiary. So obviously she wasn't. How'd that go down? So my guess is she was doing all this for what she thought was going to be a huge old payday and didn't get one. Or is she doing this just because she's so sick and wanted to? I'm going to guess it's money motivated.
I would think so. My other question is, and I don't know if this is an old wives' tale, but I assume if you commit suicide, your insurance doesn't pay out.
And did she think that this cause of death wasn't going to be discovered in an autopsy? You know what I mean? Because she isn't going to get paid out if that was the case. I don't know. There's questions about this one.
There's a lot of questions about this one.
And was she just so far gone that the family couldn't get through to her because it sounds like they suspected something? They said that, didn't they say they suspected for years that something was going on?
Yep.
Oh, and to not be able to stop it, and then it happened. And then the uncle defined his poor niece like this. While this woman is just sitting there, like she didn't try to leave the house. She was still there. Oh.
Well, and she has a duty to act, especially as a nurse. You've got to, if you can't save her, at least, call 911. Don't just sit there with an unresponsive person just looking at your watch.
But she's saying she had a DNR, so there's nothing she could do but just sit there.
But the thing is, a DNR isn't just something you proclaim. It's a legal document. I had to deal with that when I was an EMT. I mean, you'd see a bracelet on their hand. The packet of paperwork had to be there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you have to do if there's a DNR. Well, so just claiming there is one isn't enough.
I mean, I guess it'd be one thing if you worked for a hospice or something like that, and this is, you know this person's terminal. But in this case, there's so many disturbing things, so many.
There are, and I really feel
bad
like
for her family.
Yeah, this might be a really good case to keep an eye on, because this would be an interesting court case to watch.
Yes, it would. Yeah, we're going to have to follow this one.
We will.
You're locked into the Hidden Killers podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts, and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member, exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast, dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.